Hello, and welcome to Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents. Our guest today is a multi-talented photographer, actor, and novelist. He has appeared in more than 25 productions, including many daytime and primetime television shows, including Columbo, Falcon Crest, Divorce Court, One Life to Live, and Law & Order: Criminal Intent. He is also the author of 2 international thrillers, The Second Man and Double Identity, and a tie-in book to the movie Ronin, starring Robert De Niro. He is also the husband of the previous guest to our podcast, Cordelia Francis Biddle, but here he is on his own today with his latest book, Careless Love, which Kirkus Review called, for a book with a premise straight out of an Elvis Presley song, it packs an unexpected emotional punch, a powerful tale of the many ways in which love can go wrong. And a reviewer for Book Life compared it for fans of Leon Moriarty's The Husband's Secret and Jasmine Darnak's The Good Daughter. Please welcome to the show, Steve Zettler. Steve, thank you very much for coming today.
My pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes, I had read Careless Love, and in describing it to me, if I had to describe it to someone, I would almost say it's a multi-character, multi-threaded story, like along the lines of like Pulp Fiction, where you have characters living their lives and coming in and out. Does that sound like an accurate summary for you?
It does. It's interesting. We just got a movie nibble on it yesterday, and I was talking to this producer, I guess, if you will, and he was he said he just loved the characters. He said there's just like a meaty role for 8 or 9 actors in it, and it is. Yeah, it has. Well, John Clinch in his little review of it compared it to Quentin Tarantino. So you're talking about Pulp Fiction. Yeah, it does have a little bit of that. You mentioned my wife, Cordelia. We wrote the Nero Blanc Crossway Mystery series together, which are cozies. And so therefore no swear words, no sexual situations, no violence. So I've kind of joked about Careless Love that I had an awful lot of catching up to do.
And there certainly is.
All of that is present there. So
yeah, it's definitely in our book. Yeah. As a matter of fact, while I was sitting here, I was thinking about the book and waiting for us to begin. And I guess it was because you were an actor and all that. And I thought that old rather trite cliche of who would you cast for this? And it also depends on what age they would be, because I could see Grace Ralston, and I guess I started going into Coen brothers because I was thinking of Frances McDormand, but a younger one, like from the time from Blood Simple. And that would lead.
I describe her.
I stunned you for a moment.
There's a bit of trouble here, but I do describe her as being quite beautiful. So,
well, that's true.
But she generally doesn't get that tag put on her. But anyway,
that's true. It depends on what kind of beauty we're talking about here, because there are actresses who are I think the ones who are memorable. They don't have that conventional beauty. It's like they have something like Julia Roberts, who doesn't have much of an upper lip, but she has all the other features and things like that. You want an actress who's capable of kind of leaving a visible imprint on the screen.
Telephone.
Yeah, but anyway, this is all about. Would you like to go ahead and please set up the story for our viewers here today?
Let me just read the first two early paragraphs, okay? Because I think that sets it up better than actually talking about it. Because I had thought a lot more about writing these 2 paragraphs, but I'll just. There's a narrator in the book, and the narrator is 30 years old. So you do need to. 40 years old. So you do need to imagine someone with quite a bit more hair than I have. But it's a 40-year-old. So I'll start. A few weeks before she died, my mother decided the time was right to tell me the truth about my father. I can't say for sure what brought this on, but I can only guess that she'd come to this realization that death was approaching, and so felt she had a certain obligation, if nothing else, to set the record straight. I'll admit, at times her frankness would shock me, using words and phrases that stunned me to silence. She was a kind, loving, fair, generous, and honest person. So naturally, I was a bit surprised to find out there was an entire episode of her life for which I knew nothing about. I now understand that she spoke to me of these events more for herself than for me, which ultimately is how it should be. She began by informing me that the man she had divorced when I was not quite a year old, the man who had taken me, despite the collapse of his marriage, to Disneyland on an annual basis, the man who took me to Athens and Istanbul after my high school graduation, the man who took me to the Getty and Los Angeles County museums on more occasions than I can count, the maniacal baseball fan who treated me to countless Dodgers games, at least 10 a year, including every game of the 1988 World Series, the man who quite literally held me up as one of his achievements, the man who paid for my entire education, the man whose ashes my mother and I had placed in a vault at Forest Lawn Cemetery 12 years ago, was in fact not my father at all. So that's how it all begins. This is well, I don't want to get in, as my sister gets really upset if I start talking about this, but I have 3 siblings and I look nothing like them. I look nothing like my parents. And so this has always been a constant refrain in my life that they would tease me that I was adopted. I mean, they're all a little larger than I am. And so it was just, you kind of start hearing that from the time you're 5 years old and you say, well, I wonder. And of course, my mother was very clear that was not the case, but that she was definitely my mother, but that didn't clear up who my father was. So that was sort of the kernel that got me started on this, that what happens when the situation I just described pops up and where do you go from there? So that's sort of where the book goes. So this 40-year-old is informed that now deceased father, which was apparently a stepfather, but he knew nothing about this. He was, completely unaware that this child was not his child. So it's a search to go back and find this real father, which was really a tremendous amount of fun to write, because this child interviews people in 2021, if you will, asking about the father, and then there's flashbacks that go back to 1979. So it was a real treat to get to know these characters as 30-somethings and as 70-somethings. So it was fun to kind of draw up their personalities, knowing them when they were older. And then, because the majority of the book takes place in 1979, but there are interviews with them, in the current time too.
So the book runs on 2 tracks, sort of like Citizen Kane, where you have your unnamed narrator interviewing people in the present, and then it jumps back to 1979 during that week in which everything changed for a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah. And you also have several characters, because you have Grace, of course. Yeah. And you have a couple of other characters as well, like Nick and Peter, Mitch and Ray, and the McCrackens as well. Right. Do you want to go into who they are and how, obviously without trying to give away too much, but you kind of set it up from the beginning, what's going to happen.
About the book is, somewhere within the first 3 chapters, I tell you how it's going to end. And so it's not, it's sort of how it ends, but how it's going to end, but you don't know how it's going to transpire. I guess is the right word. But I went off of it with the character Ray, who is essentially not a very likable person. I kind of took basically every character flaw that I hate in men and jammed them all into one person. He's a misogynist, a homophobe. The list goes on and on with Ray. But what was but it's interesting talking to people and being at book events, that people who have read it. The interesting thing is that many people dislike the McCrackens more than they dislike Ray. So the McCrackens are, for those of you who haven't read the book, and again, I'm not giving away too much here. The main setting for the book is a private club in Hawaii that has guest suites and whatnot, and of course a club dining room, and then they offer golf and tennis and everything else that a very waspy club offers. And these clubs are pretty much the same no matter where you go in America. You know, and you run into the same type of people that, like the McCrackens, who are sticklers for club policy and don't want to see anybody sidestep that. So that's the McCrackens. But I grew up in the restaurant business, and it's funny. I grew up with my father's restaurant, and after writing the book, I realized that everybody in the book is in the service industry, either in the restaurant business or the two guys who work in the gas station. But everybody is in the service industry, and at the end of the book, there's really only two characters who are Nick, who really doesn't appear in the book at all. Nick would be the narrator's stepfather, if you will, and McCracken. By the end of the book, they're the only two who come up on the upside. You know, at the end of the book, with at least financially on the upside, I just invented these characters and let them run with it, and it went through many rewrites, of course, but anyway,
there seems to be a very strong class divide when you have Grace and Nick and Peter, who Grace and Peter, they meet at the Pickering Club and fall in love, and there he owns a restaurant, and of course she's the wife of a 2-time Oscar-winning film director, and then you have. But
he picked her up in a restaurant, waitress working in a restaurant. So
Yeah. Well, also speaking of the restaurant, as someone who washed dishes in a restaurant, I'm very happy. you portrayed that side pretty accurately from my limited perspective.
Well, I'm working on a little memoir, if you will, of the time when I was 8 years old and living above the restaurant. And the first line in the book is so right now anyway, this draft is, "You may not be aware of it, but there is no such thing as child labor laws when it comes to family-owned businesses." Yeah, I did every job. I attended bar at the age of 14 in the kitchen, because we would have wedding receptions, and so the waitress would come in to get stuff from the service bar, which is in the kitchen. So then nobody knew who was making up the whiskey sours. It was a 14-year-old kid.
Well, you get exposed to life pretty early in the restaurant business. You get exposed to a lot of people, and good people and not so good people as well. And I can see that here, where in your story about all the things that happen between, like, Mitch and Ray, who are brothers. You know, Ray, of course, being basically the emblem for toxic masculinity. Right. And Mitch, who as his brother was on the outs. He was just rejected by his girlfriend, and he's having to deal with problems of his own and he starts to find a home in the restaurant business,
exactly.
at the Pickering Club. And I think when we're talking about these relationships, what impressed me also is how, as the relationships change, you see differences in the people around them. As Mitch was finding his place in the restaurant, Ray was kind of getting threatened by that.
Yes,
by the prospect of him actually moving out, it seemed.
Yeah. Well, Ray is really, I hate to harp on Ray, because the book is basically Careless Love, and it's about the love affair between Grace and Lee. You call him Peter, but his name is Peter Lee. So anyway, so either name is fine. But the tragic thing about Ray is that because of how he was abused as a child, that there's kind of no escaping that, and he's been running from it his whole life, and he's, it's tragic. It's just that he's not in control of himself at all.
Yeah. Well, and we can get into Grace and Lee's relationship as well. And I find it really fascinating how much Grace is really her own person. And that sounds strange, but I guess if you read a lot of romances, you find that they can be very, I would almost say, two-dimensional. Mm-hmm. But she has a voice of her own. She says things, she blurts out things that kind of gets her into linguistic trouble. She also wants the truth. And there was a lovely conversation near the end where she's trying to get Lee to talk about why he's missing his finger. And this is a woman who obviously has had some experience, obviously from marrying Nick and being a party to witnessing his infidelities, and standing up for herself. And that's why that would make the role of Grace, if this actually becomes filmed, I could see actresses fighting over this role, because you give me a chance to have emotions, good emotions. This is great.
From your lips to God's ears.
So how long did it take to write this book?
It took quite a while. I mean, it went through many sort of metamorphoses, if you will. The very first draft did not have the narrator. It was simply a story from 1979 in Hawaii. Again, I'm not giving anything away here, because Grace becomes pregnant, obviously, because you've got this person telling the story, the person was born out of that pregnancy. So, but that was sort of after I wrote the first draft, I said, wait a second, I said, I can't end the story here. She's pregnant. What happens? She's going to have this baby, and so that's when I said, so the first draft, and just to give your listeners bring them up to speed, 1979, I was a Marine in Vietnam, and a lot of the married Marines would take R&R in Hawaii because their wives could meet them in Hawaii. And it was an extended R&R. They got 8 or 9 days rather than the 5 days that us schlubby enlisted men got. It was the officers got 8 or 9 days. But anyway, so that was how Lee was first introduced to Hawaii. He went there on his R&R and spent his days there with his first wife. I don't want to go too much into the first wife, because that gives away a little bit of what's going on there. But in 1979, he's no longer married. So he keeps going back to this club where he met his wife and trying to iron out, his own issues as well with regards to trauma of Vietnam and everything else. So I'm sorry, I forget where I was going with that, because I went back.
Well, I think we were also talking about how experiences feed into the storyline as well. So you mentioned Vietnam because you served. How long were you in the Marines?
I was in 3 years.
3 years.
But you spent it. Bring people up to speed on that. I mean, it's it says, oh my God, this guy just gung-ho John Wayne stuff, but and I'll try to make this as short as possible. But I was 18 years old. I had come back from 401 North Broad, which is where the draft board was in Philadelphia, and been labeled 1A on the spot. Knew I was going to be drafted into the Army, and I got kind of a sweet talk from a Marine Corps recruiter who basically assured me there was no way in hell I was going to Vietnam if I joined the Marine Corps. And well, anyway, it didn't play out that way. But the only reason I did join the Marine Corps was kind of like, I thought I was maybe join the Air Force, where you weren't going to be slogging it out through the nightmare of Vietnam. But anyway, it didn't play out that way. And there is, and I do have the flashback scene to the firefight where Lee lost his finger. And I hope you noticed I cleverly described Chico, the radio operator, which is what I was as a radio operator, cleverly disguised the elderly Chico to look exactly like me. So when the movie's made, I get to play that part.
That's very wise of you to write a part for yourself in your own book there. I think that's very clever. You have worked as an actor. Do you want to describe what your acting career is like? I mean, you have an IMDb page as well, and you have your sizzle reel on your website. So,
yeah. Well, I when I got out of the Marine Corps, I moved to New York City, and on the GI Bill went to the New York Institute of Photography. Of course, photography back then was much different than digital photography now. But and then worked as a freelance photographer in New York, which as you can guess, you're not working all the time. So I also did all the other restaurant jobs in New York City, drove a New York City cab for a year, and then started taking photographs of shows, production photographs of mostly off-Broadway shows, not Broadway shows. I never did a Broadway show, but off-Broadway shows, and started really love the theater life and became a stage manager, and then looked at these guys on stage and said, the old line from chorus line, yeah, I can do that, And so then I went to acting school and did fairly well. I was in the original cast of A Soldier's Play, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1982, which was a real experience. It was turned into a movie. I did not get the part in the movie, but it was a wonderful cast, 9 African-American actors, 3 white actors. 2 of the were all unknowns. 2 of the unknowns in the cast were Denzel Washington and Samuel L. Jackson. So it was just a great experience working with everybody. It was a great ensemble cast. Then I was about ready to drop out of the acting scene, and my wife Cordelia said, "Well, you've never been to Los Angeles, so you should probably go out there and at least check it out," which I did. And then we moved out to Los Angeles, and we were there for 7 or 8 years, and different time television-wise, because there was no cable television, so it was ABC, NBC, CBS. That's it. There was. I mean, the product that's out there today is mind-boggling, the number of shows and different channels and everything. But it was pretty limited back then. And you found that after 8 years, I found that either the casting directors loved me or hated me. And if they hated me, I wasn't going to do any of their shows. And if they loved me, I do an episode of the show, and then you're kind of shot for the show because you played Dr. Harris, and you're not going to come back the next year playing, Officer Jones. You're kind of shot for the whole show. So anyway, it dried up. But Cordelia had published her first novel, and so I started working on my first novel after she published hers. And writers are going to hate to hear this because it's impossible. The road to getting your manuscript in book form is torturous, to say the least. Finding an agent, finding editors, finding this and that. But I wrote my first thriller and just gave it to her agent, and he gave it to somebody at Penguin Putnam, and boom, done deal. So it was other writers are going to hate to hear how simple it was.
That was a similar experience with my first book, Writers Gone Wild, where basically I found an editor in Publishers Weekly who was looking for pop culture books and found an agent. Once I found the agent, I just passed the information on to the agent, and she approached the editor and sold the book the next day. Yeah. So, it does happen. But also, you wouldn't have gotten, if the manuscript might have gotten in the door, but if it wasn't well written enough, they're not going to do you a favor.
Yeah, I think the acting background really helps for a writer. I often suggest that writers should take an acting class, but having done it I've been a member of Screen Actors Guild for 40 years. So, and done theater. So you get to read a lot of good scripts and a lot of good writing, and particularly in theater. And so it's the dialogue is a lot comes to be a lot easier, I think, than it may for some writers, especially if you're the type of person who just stays in your little den, hole in the ground, writing away and don't talk to anybody. So
you find it a help in creating a character where you have to have something distinctive about them?
I do. Studying at Uta Hagen's studio in New York, that one of her great things is as an actor, she would say, you always have to consider the question, how do I get what I want? And nobody opens their mouth without wanting a reaction of some sort, or wants to get something, whether it's a reaction from somebody else or get a candy bar. You want to get something, and it's a great thing to keep at the back of your mind. When writing dialogue, that characters got to be after something.
Mm-hmm. But you also have to be aware, I would think, of things like subtext, where they are not going to, this is the worst kind of dialogue where they say, as you know, Bob, I'm a detective here and I'm trying to solve this case. I know you are, but how are you going to do this? That's a little bit too much on the nose there, but people don't talk like that.
Yeah. And then there's a lot what's going on, what's said and what's unsaid,
Well, I think we see a little bit of that when I remember when Grace was talking to Tug McCracken, and Tug is bearing down on her, on her behavior with Lee at the club, and there's intimations there, and you only catch it like a little bit, that abuse formed part of her background as well,
right,
long ago. And again, it's never really, it doesn't come to the surface, certainly in that scene, but it was that there's a very strong jolt there that informs why she does what she did.
Yeah. She's definitely, she's, was abused as a child as well, and I opted not to really go into that extreme detail, but just hint at it, and it makes her wary of men in general, and
yeah. But it's the type of book where you really have to spend time with the characters. And I'm too hypercritical in the beginning. I think it's from a prior career as a book critic, where you're starting to read and you're going, okay, why did he say that? It takes all the fun out of it, for one thing. But
yeah.
That's why it's a matter of also trying to be aware of my biases and let the story tell itself to me, rather than trying to impose some kind of structure on it. And that's what I really enjoyed about this. Once I got into the flow of it and just kind of let it work, trust the magic, trust the narrative. And it paid off. I think it's a great book, and I've really enjoyed reading it. So let's see, as far as during the writing process, were you sharing your book with Cordelia and getting feedback from her?
Well, it's interesting. We are both writers, and we did write our 12 books together, which required, of course, a lot of collaboration, a lot of back and forth and discussion. She very much likes to talk about what she's writing and what's going on in the current book that she's working on. I don't let anybody near it until I at least get a draft, a completed draft. So she had no idea what I was writing until I let her read one of the drafts somewhere along the line. So she doesn't get to give me much input.
Yeah, and I'm actually kind of the same opinion with you, because my wife writes science fiction romances, and she talks to me about the characters and talks to me about what they do, and she's not actually asking for feedback. I think she's also trying to tell the story in her head, and I tend to want to wait until I actually get a draft done before. Actually, I wait until I'm finished, because I just want it to be my type of story. I want to tell it the way I want to do it.
Well, I really had a a super, super editor on Careless Love. She was just so being a woman, she really just gave it another dimension, So she was really, really wonderful editor. Anyway.
Yeah, that's great. Are you working on anything else now?
I as I said, I'm working on this little sort of fictionalized memoir of living above my father's restaurant. It's very light. It's hopefully people will chuckle when they're reading it. He owned the Washington Crossing Inn. I don't know if I think you're in Reading, right?
I'm out of Hershey.
Oh, Hershey. Okay. So anyway, Washington Crossing Inn, where George Washington crossed the Delaware in 1776. There's a national state park on I guess it's a national park now in Pennsylvania, and over in New Jersey, it's a state park. And there's a veteran cemetery now there as well. But it was back then, to have a liquor license in Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, you needed to have rooms to rent. I'm talking about back then, the 1930s, or after Prohibition, basically. You had to have rooms to rent to get a liquor license. So there were 10 guest rooms there, and my great aunt, who was born in Germany, opened the place and furnished these 10 guest rooms in basically used furniture, which of course in 1930s was early American antiques. So these were very charming guest rooms. And it was basically a shack-up place for New York producers, actors, and some crazy people came through there. And the restaurant was very charming and cozy with a big fireplace in the winter. And so we had all of the Bucks County characters come in for dinner, Pearl Buck, John Dos Passos, James Michener, Oscar Hammerstein. All these people would float in, and you're 8 years old, and you're kind of running around. Everybody just kind of draws what they're doing, and my dad was like Jimmy Stewart. I mean, he was knew everybody's name who walked through the front door. So Lee is, a lot of what I talk about Lee with his restaurant, people, it's a small, high-end restaurant, and who's coming through the door, and what they like, and to not let other customers bother the celebs. I mean, I go through that in the book. Lee goes through that and says that's how he runs his restaurant. So that's pretty much how my dad ran his restaurant as well. Although the bar was a lot more raucous than the bar in the book, Lee's bar in the books.
Well, I'll be looking forward to reading that. I love memoirs in general, and that sounds like it's going to be a corker. So, Steve, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us about the book.
Pleasure, indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is Bill Peschel for Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop, and I hope your favorite book is the one you're reading now. Thank you very much, and bye-bye. The Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents podcast is sponsored by the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. The store is open with limited hours, plus we accept appointments and offer a drive-by service. The store will also ship books to your home, including those from the Peschel Press Mystery line, including our annotated editions of novels by Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers. To learn more, visit the store at www.mysterybooksonline.com. And thank you for listening.